loves. Okay, we were gonna do a mini series on serial killers, but I had some trouble uploading the last video. So I think YouTube kind of has like policies against really disgusting, disturbing material. So we're not gonna do that right now. I'm gonna have to look into it and figure out a different way to do it. So tonight's episode, we are going to talk about historical facts you'll wish weren't really true. Now, I read through most of them, and they're really not that bad, but some of them are pretty fucked up. So, just listen. History is stranger than fiction, and often grosser and creepier too. So, let's get into it. King Tut's parents were most likely siblings. Now, back then, that was a pretty common thing. They thought keeping it in the family was, I don't know, keeping the blood pure. Yeah, weird. Once you finish shuddering with disgust, here's what researchers know about the boy king and his family. His father was almost definitely Akhenaten, hard to pronounce, who preceded Tut as pharaoh in the 14th century BC. The identity of his mother is pretty much unknown, but recent DNA samples from his and other mummies have revealed that she was probably one of his sisters. King Tut was rather frail and he suffered from a bone disorder, perhaps due to his parentage. Incestuous relationships, though, weren't out of the ordinary in ancient Egypt, a fact which is not exactly reassuring. Um, Despite Tut's health issues and his short life, even by the standards back then, he died at 19 years of age. 19! He was 19 years old. He's gone down in history as one of Egypt's most famous and wealthiest pharaohs of all time. So that's pretty cool. Let's raise this up a bit. Oh geez, it's like broken. Okay. So someone tried and failed to save Abraham Lincoln, and his life just got weirder and darker from that point on. You're probably familiar with the 1860s illustration, The Assassination of President Lincoln, which is this. I'm sure you've seen it before. Try to get you to see it there. Yeah, it's a pretty famous illustration. But who is that pair sharing the private box with the ill-fated president and his wife? It's an important question in history, actually. The man on the far left rushing into action is Major Henry Rathbone. President and Mrs. Lincoln specifically asked him and his fiancée Clara Harris to accompany them to the theater. After Booth fired the shot, Rathbone tried to tackle him to the ground, but Booth was able to get free by slicing Rathbone in the arm with a dagger. Rathbone was never free of the memory and guilt of that night, and he reportedly felt responsible for letting Booth get away. The years to come, he experienced a myriad of health concerns, from stomach ailments to heart palpitations, and his mental state deteriorated as well. On December 23rd, 1883, 18 years after the assassination, he attacked and killed Clara, now his wife, and attempted to kill himself. He would spend the rest of his life in a mental institution. I did not actually know that. That's pretty crazy. All right. This one I thought was rather spooky. Okay, yeah. Like my shirt? I'm spooky all year round. It's true. In 1494, Europe experienced the closest thing to a real-life zombie outbreak. This is no fucking joke. No joke. I can see something like this happening in the future. I really can. I'm not psychic, but I'm just saying. Italy's Renaissance period has a major, though little known, dark side. Sailors returning from the New World brought with them a massive outbreak of syphilis, which spread through an entire French army. The troops then brought what would become known as the Great Pox to the rest of Europe. With no such thing as antibiotics back then, the disease was able to spread unchecked, and its effects were fucking nasty. Just totally nasty. The skin on victims' faces would essentially rot away from the disease as grisly ulcers. In some cases, the noses, lips, and other body parts of the affected people were essentially gone. They would literally just melt off like butter. Several of the victims eventually died from the disease. No shit, because it caused some major, major damage. The syphilis outbreak was basically the real world version of the zombie apocalypse. No big deal, right? Yeah, it was a huge deal. 19th century New Englanders dug up a young woman's body because they thought she was a vampire. You've undoubtedly heard of the Salem witch trials, but what about the Rhode Island accused vampire? In the late 1800s, a bout of tuberculosis, then called consumption, struck Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Vermont, and the residents didn't know what to make of it. Since its victims tended to look sunken, pallid, drained, people assumed that they had fallen prey to vampires. So, naturally, there was a vampire hunt. Soon commenced, and then when members of an Exeter, Rhode Island family began dying of consumption, one after the other townspeople decided that someone in the family must be feeding on the others. Even after the mother, Mary Brown, and her 2 daughters had died, the townspeople decided to exhume the dead bodies, suspecting that one might in fact be the undead. Brown's 19-year-old daughter, Mercy, had died much more recently than her family members, so her body was in much better condition. Excuse me. Her heart even still contained some decayed blood, a sure sign of vampirism in those days. So, to prevent her from striking again, they burned her heart and liver and mixed the ashes with water. Then they gave the concoction to another affected townsperson as a cure. Unsurprisingly, it didn't work. Oh shit. God. So, this is a doll that Thomas Edison had made. Very, very creepy. Thomas Edison created a seriously creepy doll. For all of his successful inventions, Thomas Edison did experience a pretty major failure when he tried to create the first ever talking doll. His 1877 development of the tinfoil phonograph was a major breakthrough in terms of sound recording, and the endless possibilities for this technology were not lost on Edison. In 1890, thanks to the development of the waxed cylinder, he was able to produce a line of baby dolls with wooden bodies, porcelain heads, and miniature phonographs in their chests. The dolls were unlike anything the world had ever seen or heard before. The phonographs played back recordings of young women reciting nursery rhymes like Hickory Dickory Dock and Now I Lay Me Down to Sleep. This is just fucking creepy. The dolls back then were extremely creepy. Dolls are just creepy in general. You know what? Chucky, Annabelle, yeah, those ruined it. They ruined it for us. And if ever there were dolls that deserved their own horror flick, it was these. Yeah, that would make a good movie. The old garbled technology, the shrill voices, and the dolls' eerie faces combined to make them into nightmare fuel for us today. But that's not actually the reason the dolls were unsuccessful. Their failure was due more to several different things. The pieces were easy to lose, the sound didn't last long, and it was hard to understand them. The mini phonographs were highly breakable. I mean, they sat in the chest, and if you were just a little bit rough with the doll, they would bust immediately. So, understandable. And finally, the dolls were simply expensive. Most people weren't rich back then, you know. Okay. So this is a historical fact that I thought was really, really fucking weird. I never knew this. Dentures used to be made from the teeth of dead soldiers. What? Frederick, why have false teeth when you can have real teeth? Excuse me. That must have been the mentality of 19th century dentists. They combated the outbreak of tooth decay with makeshift dentures. ivory base plates with real human teeth attached. Scavengers were already looting corpses from the Battle of Waterloo for their teeth, and now they could sell the teeth to dentists. Wow. The dentist would boil the choppers, okay, cut off the roots, attach them. Oh boy. I guess he was a bit excited about all of this. All right, Frederick, you stand here. You behave yourself. Phew. Like we needed something to scare us a little more, huh? Okay, where were we? Mental Floss doubts that the customers had any idea where the teeth came from. Whether that makes it more or less creepy is up to you to decide. I don't think it's creepy. I just think it's, okay, it's a little creepy. I think it's just really gross, you know. Ugh. So researchers once turned a cat into a telephone. A live cat. Okay, I never read this one, so I don't know what the fuck is happening. We know what you're thinking. You've got to be kidding me. Well, unfortunately, we're not. In 1929, a pair of scientists at Princeton University wanted to test how the auditory nerve perceives sound. Their test subject was a heavily sedated but alive cat. The scientists, Ernest Weaver and Charles Bray, cut out part of its brain and attached one end of a telephone wire to its auditory nerve and the other end to a receiver. When Bray said something into the cat's ears, Weaver could hear him through the receiver in a soundproof room. That is fucking crazy. That is just crazy. Though it might just seem like a sick experiment, it actually did have some beneficial effects. Many researchers believe it helped lead to the development of the cochlear implant, which is amazing. That is for our deaf people. As for the feline-turned phone, it incredibly survived the experiment, but Weaver and Bray didn't release it back into the world. Instead, they killed it to see if the experiment would work on a dead cat. It didn't. That's terrible. Didn't really need to kill the fucking cat, did we? God. Boston experienced a deadly molasses flood. Molasses. Okay, this makes the Boston Tea Party look tame. In January of 1919, an enormous molasses tank burst in the north end of Boston. While a molasses flood might sound like a scene from a Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, it was no laughing matter. The tank contained and released nearly 2.5 million gallons of this sticky substance, which surged through the streets at a whopping 35 miles per hour. It was essentially a full-on tidal wave reaching nearly 15 feet tall and killing 21 people. I thought this was a joke, but it's not a fucking joke. This is real. My God. 150 more people were injured, and buildings and houses were knocked from their foundations. Emergency responders had trouble reaching the victims since they had to clamber through the sticky sludge. It took Bostonians weeks to clean up the mess, and many residents would claim that in the summer heat they could smell the sickly sweet odor of molasses even years later. Oh, what a disaster. That's a sticky situation, huh? Yeah. So a computer once did in 40 seconds what took a mathematician an entire lifetime. That sounds about right. Say it isn't so. While not gross or scandalous, this history fact is still something of a downer. William Shanks, a 19th century mathematician, spent his entire life calculating the digits of pi. He successfully calculated the first 527 digits and found another 180 digits, though those calculations were incorrect. But calculating the first 527 digits is still really, really impressive. Or rather, it was in 1873. In 1958, a computer calculated the same number of digits in less than 1 minute. Yeah. And then calculated another 10,000. Perhaps it's better poor Shanks wasn't alive to see that. If it's any consolation, though, humans did invent the computer. Yes, we did. Yeah. A king made his subjects worship the corpse of his beloved. Now that's love. That's true love. This case of star-crossed lovers got weird very fast. In 14th century Portugal, the king's son Dom Pedro fell in love with his Inés de Castro. There was only a couple of problems with this. For one, his father, King Alfonso V, did not approve because Inés was illegitimate. For another, Dom Pedro was married. His father had arranged for him to marry a noble woman named Constanza, crazy names. And Inés was Constanza's lady in waiting. When Don Pedro refused to, hang on a second. When Don Pedro refused to stop seeing her, the king had her killed. When Don Pedro acceded to the throne 2 years later, he exhumed her body, had it clothed in royal dress, and crowned her queen. According to historical legend, he made the other nobles all kiss her hand as a sign of their devotion. Phew. So those were the historical facts you'll wish weren't really true. And I mean, they really weren't all that bad. Some were pretty fucking strange. Some I didn't know. Some I already did know. Yeah. So I have to wait a little while for the mini serial killer series. I gotta figure what's going on with YouTube because it would not let me post the episodes that I already did. So I'll try to get that figured out so we can go about that. So I chose to do this one for tonight just for something a little bit different. As much as I love my spooky horror type stuff, I really like to incorporate some comedy into there because sometimes the shit is too real and it's like you just need something to kind of smooth it over a little bit. And yeah, so this is Fredward's first fall that he's had on live TV. Poor bastard, that was embarrassing. It did scare me a little bit, but I'm kind of used to it. Fredward's kind of all over the place. I know it doesn't seem like it, but he really is. I don't know what's up with him. Anyways, drop me some comments, leave me some love. You know how I like my love. And let me know what you would like to hear for next week's episode, or we could even do a mini episode like later this week, which I'd be fine with that. I do have a book of mini, well, they're short horror stories. It's a really good book, and there's some really good stories in there. So like Tuesday or Wednesday, I could definitely do a short episode of one of those scary stories. I would love that. Let me know if you like that idea. And also let me know what you would like to hear or learn about for next week's episode, next Sunday. I will drop my, excuse me. I will drop my merch link in the description of this video. Check out the Red Mistress stuff. I think you'll really, really like it. I got lots of good stuff. Hoodies, cups, posters, all kinds of stuff. I also do some modeling and music, so you can check that out as well. Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. So it's Sunday night, start of a new week. I hope you all have an amazing week. I hope you had a good Thanksgiving. I did. It was great. I gained a few pounds from it, but I'm gonna work out a little extra tonight, try to get it gone. So anyways, I love you guys so much. Thanks for the love and support, and I will see you soon. Have a great week. Good night.